Hello. Let's try this again. Hello, Doug. Let me go. Hello.
Hey, sorry I'm a little bit late.
No problem.
All right, Melvin.
All right. How are you two? How have things been going for you since since 2020? Crazy.
Well, I'm dealing with the same stuff everyone's dealing with. The gyms are all closed.
Oh, they're still closed?
Well, California is not doing well, and Los Angeles County is doing especially bad. They're saying a death every 15 minutes. The hospitals are so full that the ambulances have to wait sometimes as long as 2 hours before they can unload their patient. They're also being told that not to bring anybody to the hospital that probably can't be saved. So it's not good here.
Okay.
But I'm healthy. I'm staying healthy, and I'm working out and I'm training my clients at home, and so everything's all right.
Okay. Yeah, they're saying that it's normally affected for people that are like above a certain age, like the elderly,
Right.
more. Yeah. So
Well, what they're saying, I don't know. Do you know who Dr. Drew is?
no.
Dr. Drew is he's a commentator on a lot of these news programs,
Mhm.
and he said if you're over 60 and you get flu-like symptoms,
Mhm.
you should immediately get tested. Don't just assume that if you have it, you'll get over it. Get tested. If you're test positive, you should get on dexamethasone right away, because if you don't, and you're over 60, or you have some of these underlying conditions, that once the inflammation starts and once the neurological problem starts, it'll start accelerating fast because you haven't put any anti-inflammatories in your system yet.
Mm.
And so if you get ahead of it, they say you can probably stay out of the hospital and probably stay off of a ventilator. But if you wait until it's bad enough to have to go to the hospital, it may be too late.
Mm.
Once it gets a head start on you like that, it's difficult to catch up.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just know about it. I don't read anything about it. So, all right.
So what's it like in Singapore? Aren't you guys having trouble there?
So we are getting vaccines now, but so gone through a few phases. So also because our country is much smaller, right? So we had a lockdown period, so that helped. But I think for the size of Singapore, I think we had maybe our total cases are maybe like 55,000. So,
Yeah, I know that India is the
mm,
number 2 most prolific infection rate right now. Next
mm,
to number 1 is the United States.
mm,
Well, I'd say we've just handled it so badly here.
mm-hmm. Okay. So in order to start, like, can I just get you to give yourself like a brief introduction of like who you are?
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
So, well, I started weight training at the age of 14 at home because I just wanted to not be skinny. That's always been my tendency, is to be skinny. So, but I realized very quickly that, I needed more than just a little home gym at home. So, I went to the local gym, which was like walking distance from my house, and it was owned by Bill Pearl.
Oh.
And there he was, right there in the office. So I went inside, and this was at 14 years old, and I asked him if I could join, and he said, "Well, how old are you?" I said, at the time I was 14. He said, "Can you wait until you're 15? 15 is our minimum age." So I said, "Yeah." So I went there when I was 15, but I couldn't afford to buy a membership. because my mother was, low income and my father had left when I was 5 years old. So I asked Bill Pearl if he would let me scrub the showers, do janitorial work for him in exchange for membership. And he said, sure. He said, come in here every Saturday. I'll put you to work. That's just 1 day a week. I'll pay you also, and you'll earn your membership in advance. So that's how I started. And then 1 year later, when I was 16, I started competing. First contest was a teenage contest. I, didn't have much muscle, but I took second place. Then by the time I was 19, I won Teenage Mr. California and Teenage Mr. America. And then I couldn't stop, and I was hooked. I won Mr. California at 22. I won my division of Mr. America at 26. I won my division of Mr. Universe at 26. I competed again at 31, at 40, at 50, at 56. So I ended up, winning kind of a lot of contests. I get a lot of titles, but along the way, I learned an awful lot about biomechanics. So now this is what's good, I guess, for me, is because once you get to the end of your career, you have to do something, right? You have to make money somehow. You have to make a living. And it just so happened, I didn't realize it along the way. That was never really my goal, was to become an educator. But it turns out that the information that I had gathered on my own was better than anything that's out there right now. So I wrote a book called The Physics of Resistance Exercise. It's endorsed by 10 PhDs, and it's changing the way people understand resistance exercise. I mean, I don't know how much of that but I'll give you a couple of examples. Once I quit my introduction, I'll give you a couple of examples of like some shockingly obvious mistakes that traditional exercises make.
All right. Yeah, this and I have to say it's a very good book. So I've literally read it from start to finish.
Did you finish the book?
I finished the book. Yeah, I just had to I had to go to Healthy something to buy the ebook version.
Right.
Your website didn't have it because like the shipping to Singapore from example the website is like 30 US, so half of the book. So,
yeah, right. Right. No, it's actually $43, which is more than half the book. And then, by the way, some countries don't have. I have a couple of options here. I can ship it out of the country with the United States Postal Service. That's the cheapest. That's $43, but that means it arrives at your border, and then your postal service has to pick it up and finish the rest of it. Some countries don't have a good postal service.
Yeah.
Some services are very unreliable. Some are better. But if I send it by way of FedEx or UPS, they take it right to your door. Yeah. But it costs like over $100 just to ship. So it's a little difficult, yeah. But the ebook is a good way of doing it. I'm not allowed to sell the ebook version. I buy the printed version and then resell it. But all the ebook versions have to go through the publisher's website.
That's where I got it from. All right. Since we're at it, so like you mentioned like mistakes that people. So
I'll start off with a couple that are really obvious and less, let's say, ingrained in people's psychology. Okay. So a lot of times a trainer will give us what we call a medicine ball, a weighted ball. And they want you to hold it at arm's length and they want you to rotate side to side. And then they tell you that's for your midsection, right? And the assumption is if you're moving the midsection, it must be good, and holding the weight must make it more good. But it's wrong, because this weight wants to go down, and your motion is horizontal. You can't operate a horizontal. You can't operate a horizontal movement with a vertical resistance. That would be like you lying down on your side on a floor mat and doing dumbbell curls while lying sideways, right? It's logical that if you're pulling up, resistance has to pull you down. If you're doing lat pull downs and you're pulling down, resistance is pulling you up. Resistance must always work opposite your movement. If I rotate to the left, resistance has to come from the right, not from gravity, not from this ball. So what's keeping this ball from falling are my shoulders, my arms, right? when I let go of that ball, then my shoulders are relieved, but the rotation hasn't changed. It doesn't make any difference. You're not getting any opposition if the resistance isn't moving opposite. So that's an obvious one. But I'll give you one that's maybe more shocking, maybe more hard to believe, but completely true.
Mm-hmm.
And before I tell you what the exercise is, I'll tell you what the rule is. The rule is all muscles pull toward their origin. Mm. Okay, so let's imagine that you're a muscle origin, and I give you one end of a rope, and you hold that end of the rope, and I tie the other end to a heavy box over there. And then I get out of the way, and I say, pull on the rope. That box will move toward you. Mm-hmm. Okay, if the knot on the box, if the rope that I attach here is the muscle insertion, and you're the muscle origin, the insertion moves toward the origin, mm-hmm. right? Mm. You cannot pull that box in any direction other than toward you, mm-hmm. right? But what happens when you do incline presses? There's no pectoral muscle above the shoulder line. Mm. You're moving toward the chin or toward the nose. There's no muscle there. There's no pectoral. So we were all told that upper chest requires incline movement. Mm-hmm. But that would only be true if the arms were connected to the torso right in the middle between the highest and the lowest part of the chest. Mm-hmm. If the arms are right there, then moving them upward would move toward the upper half. And moving them downward would move them toward the lower half. But the arms are connected at the very top of the pectorals. The pectorals are entirely below the arm line. Mm-hmm. There's nothing above the arm line. So doing an incline press is not good for the upper chest. Doing a flat press moves your arm already too. If you do this, mm-hmm. flat press, you're already moving to the highest part of the chest. If you mm-hmm. go like this, you're moving toward your chin or your nose. You're not moving toward. So believe it or not, I only do one chest exercise now. It's a slight decline press, dumbbell press. And that's because the best single exercise for the chest is one that moves the insertion of the pectoral muscle toward the center of the sternum. That's where most of the pectoral fibers are, mm-hmm. right? So that creates a slight decline angle because the middle of your sternum, let's see if I can do this. The middle of your sternum is right there, and that's lower than your shoulder. So a slight decline press moving toward the center of your sternum would be the way to get the majority of the pectoral muscles. By the way, the other thing too that I talk about in my book is that, you know, from an evolutionary standpoint, we evolved as quadrupeds. You know, our old, you know, mammal ancestors, our early mammal ancestors were on all fours, right? Then little by little, that species started becoming more primate-like, and then more hominin-like, right? And then more Homo erectus and Homo sapien, right? And we moved our arms progressively downward, but never progressively upward. There would never have been a time in history where any mammal ever had to move their arms at an angle that was 45 degrees toward their head. From just an evolutionary, you know, need. We never needed to do that. So the development, the evolution of our musculoskeletal system would never have had to accommodate that function. The shoulder joint isn't designed to do that. And the musculature isn't designed to do that. I mean, we can pull it off, but that doesn't mean that we're going to benefit from it. And there's lots and lots and lots of other examples that exercise that we thought were very good completely. I'll give you just one more example. When we do rowing exercises, we think we're working the upper inner back, right? But guess what's on the upper inner back? The middle trapezius. Mm-hmm. And the middle trapezius doesn't even connect to the arms. It goes from the spine to the outer part of the shoulder blade. So the middle trapezius only pulls the shoulders back. Mm-hmm. It doesn't pull on the arms at all. And yet most people, when they do rowing, they mostly focus on the arm. Mm-hmm. Okay. It doesn't work the upper back. It may work the lats a little bit, but not as much as a pull down would work them. So when you look at things in a really logical way, you say that just doesn't make any sense. There's no way the middle trapezius can pull on the arm because it's not connected to the arm. Okay, your turn. I'm sorry. I could totally dominate.
Yeah,
This to be kind of an exchange.
no worries. Yeah, so like that's like as compared to now, like these are the common mistakes or common like errors in the sense that you see. Like, what are would these three be like the top mistakes that you see people make, or are there like a few?
No, look, I mean, I got to tell you, there are so many exercises that don't make sense. Upright rows don't make sense. Standard, traditional rear deltoid exercises don't make sense. Overhead triceps of any kind don't make sense. I mean, I know there's some people that may be listening to this right now that are just getting upset listening to me say this, and I would have to explain to you the mechanics of each movement, the anatomical part of each movement, the physics part of each movement. And then when I did all that, then you would understand. I'll give you another one, leg raises. Leg raises don't make any sense if you're intending to do them for the abs. The rectus abdominis, which is the abs. That's what we call the six pack. The rectus abdominis goes from the front part of your rib cage down to the pubic bone of the pelvis, right? It does not connect to the legs. It cannot pull on the legs, right? When that muscle shortens, when that muscle contracts and shortens, it brings the origin and the insertion closer together, which creates a curving, a rounding of the back, which we call spinal flexion. That's what the abdominal muscle does, right? So that's what you should do as an exercise for the abs. Spinal flexion, period, right? The idea that you're going to do leg raises, which is not spinal flexion, for a muscle that performs one function and that function is spinal flexion, is ridiculous. So then someone could say, well, when I do leg raises, my abs get sore. Why do they get sore? I'll tell you why they get sore. For the same reason your lower back would get sore when you're doing standing barbell curls. Because when you curl the weight and that weight gets in front of your body, it wants to pull your torso forward. So your lower back is keeping that from happening. But you would never call standing barbell curls a lower back exercise, right? Because the lower back is working isometrically, holding tension without movement, so that another muscle that's working dynamically, meaning with movement, which is the biceps, right? While that muscle is doing the work, the other muscle is keeping everything steady. The same thing happens with leg raises, right? So, like if you have a gun and you shoot the gun, it's going to kick back, right? Same thing happens with your legs. When you lift your legs forward, the tailbone would kick back, right? Because of the physics and the balance of it, right? What keeps your tailbone from kicking back is your abs. It's keeping your spine steady. Right? So the abdominal muscle is working isometrically, but they've done study after study to show that isometric tension does not produce nearly as much benefit as does dynamic exercise, having that muscle actually elongate and shorten. So, but there are so many people, this is part of the problem in bodybuilding and in fitness, there are so many people that have embraced these traditional exercises that they have a hard time believing that an exercise they thought was good isn't good. But all you got to do is look at the anatomy. Just look at the anatomy. And you see, oh my God, yeah, I can see now the abdominal muscle doesn't connect to the legs. So here's the question. Number one is if it's not the abs that are raising the legs, what muscle is raising the legs? Well, the muscle that is, it's actually a group of muscles, but one primary muscle called the psoas. It's the hip flexors, right? And the main hip flexor is the psoas muscle. The psoas muscle originates on the lumbar spine, on that curved part. So if your spine goes like this, it anchors on the front, and then it comes down and connects to the legs. So when you activate that muscle, and that muscle goes under tension, it pulls the lower back forward. Well, that forward pull creates an arching of the back. Arching the back is the opposite of spinal flexion. In other words, your abdominal muscle is trying to create spinal flexion, but the hip flexors are preventing it. They're interfering with that. That would be like you doing a barbell curl and me blocking you. Every time that bar comes up halfway, I stop it. So the abdominal muscle never gets to fully shorten, even if it was contracting at all. Mostly it's isometric, but it's getting in the way. It's interfering with. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons why we've been misinformed. Mm-hmm. Some of it is innocent. Some of it is just the followers following the followers. Mm-hmm. And each follower thinks that once they know it, they can teach it. So then they teach you what they think is a lower ab exercise. By the way, there is no lower ab, right? I'll get into that in just a minute. But they teach you this exercise, and then they teach the next person and the next person. Let's just say someone's been teaching leg raises for 10 years. And I come along and I say, well, you know, leg raises actually don't work the abs very well at all. And so you're sort of by the way, they don't take away benefit. So if you're going to have good abs because you're doing enough good stuff, and then you stand on stage, you go, well, look at my abs look good. I did leg raises. It's like, all right, that only proves that leg raises didn't stop you from getting good abs. But it didn't help you as much as those crunches did. Mm. Okay, so the point I wanted to make was this guy, let's call him a trainer. He goes on and he teaches, for 10 years, he teaches people to do leg raises. I come along and I say leg raises aren't so good. This guy now has to deal with a dilemma. The dilemma is, oh shit, I've been teaching people wrong for 10 years. I'd rather deny what this guy is telling me. I'd rather continue believing that I've been teaching it right because my pride is at stake. My reputation is at stake. My ego is at stake. I don't want to believe that I've been misleading people. So I always say, look, don't interpret it that way. Everybody has been misled. It was an innocent mistake. Mm. There's a justification why you thought that exercise was good for the abs, but it's not. And it's not your fault. But now that you know, be an adult about it and just accept the science and the logic and start doing it right. Mm-hmm. What I was going to say was, you know, if you were to get on Google or any of these search engines and you say, what's the best exercise for the lower abs? You'll get millions of recommendations for different kinds of leg raises, videos, and all kinds of things. So let's just consider what the lower abs is. Okay? Most people would agree that it's the lower part of the rectus abdominis, right? So imagine that we're looking at an anatomy chart right now, and you're looking at the ribs, the attachment on the ribs comes down, connects to the pubic bone of the pelvis. And you say, okay, so let's just say it's the lower half or the lower third of this stretch of muscles. And you can see the linea alba, which is the thing in the middle. And you can see the tendinous intersections, which are the muscles in between, right? Those little lines. And those are called tendinous intersections. They're like tendons, right? They're not muscle, right? They're fibrous connective tissue, just like a tendon. And those things have been there since the day you were born, right? That is no different than an Achilles tendon, right? It's there since the day you were born. You can never add a second Achilles tendon, and you can never add more tendinous intersections. What you were born with is all that you will ever have. So the idea that someone's going to make a 4-pack turn into a 6-pack or an 8-pack is impossible, because it suggests that you can somehow add tendons. You cannot add tendons. Your muscle structure is what it is. It'll never be anything different than that. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, some people say, no, I don't want to add any notches. I just want to get rid of the fat that's in my lower midsection. And so I say, oh, so you think you can spot reduce? You know what spot reduction is, right? Spot reduction is deciding that the back of your arms need to lose fat, so you work the triceps. No, the triceps work, but that has nothing to do with the fat that's covering them. You can't choose where the fat goes on, and you can't choose where the fat comes off. All you can do is turn your body into a fat loss mode by reducing your calories and burning more calories than you're taking in. And then your body will take from its fatty reserves, called adipose tissue, It'll take from those reserves as necessary in the reverse order that they came on. In other words, the areas that want to stay fatty, accumulated fat first, are last to lose it. The areas of your body that have the least amount of fat are the least that attract fat, and the last ones to lose it, or the first ones to lose it. So here's what happens. So let's just say that you have reduced your caloric intake, and now you're increasing your calorie spending, and you're doing abdominal crunches or leg raises or whatever you want to be doing. And your body actually needs reserve fuel. The idea that the working muscle is going to reach next door to the neighboring fat and pull fat into the muscle and burn it in this muscle is impossible. First of all, there's no connection to that fatty deposit next to me. Let's just, assuming I'm the muscle, the fatty deposit is on the outside of me. I can't reach over there and grab any fat. That's number one. Number two is what's on the other side of the skin, or whatever you want to call it, wherever the fat is, what's on the other side is called adipose tissue. And adipose tissue is not something your body burns. It has to be converted first to this thing called free fatty acids. There's no way I can convert that adipose tissue to a free fatty acid, because that happens what's called systemically. The system does that. So let's just say you're riding a stationary bike, right? And you're on a diet, you're on a calorie restricted diet, and you're pedaling the bike. And there's not enough fuel in the bloodstream because you're not eating enough. And so the muscles of my legs tell my system to release tiny, tiny amounts of adipose tissue and convert it to free fatty acids in all the various places of the body, and then enter the bloodstream near you, and then come to me, the working muscle. Mm-hmm. That means that my legs, as they're pedaling the bike, are going to be burning fat that came off my face, my neck, my back, my arms, not the legs, because it's coming off the last place that it accumulated, or the first. So the place that's least likely to have any fat is usually the face. For women, it's usually the hips and thighs, in the back of the arms. For men, it's usually the waist. But the muscle that's working doesn't care. It's feeding off the bloodstream. And the bloodstream is getting it from the body, from all over, in these tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of adipose tissue converted into free fatty acid. So there's just no way that you can spot reduce. So here's the thing. If you say to me, I want to work my lower abs because I want to add more notches, I say, well, you can't add more notches. They're there since birth. Okay, I want to do it so I can lose fat there. That can't happen either, because you can't spot reduce. So even if you could somehow cause there to be more tension on the lower part of the rectus abdominis than in the upper part of the rectus abdominis, it still would not change anything. Nothing you could see would change. You get no more notches, you get no more fat loss. But you cannot cause the lower half to have more tension than the upper half. You cannot do it. It's like a rope. It's like a tug of war. If you and I have opposite ends of the rope and we're pulling on this rope, the tension in the rope is going to be evenly distributed. If you start to win and back up and I'm losing and I'm going forward, it isn't that the tension on your end or closer to your end is more than the tension on my end. If I start to win, the tension isn't more on my end. It doesn't matter which way the rope is moving. As long as there's tension pulling on two ends, the tension is evenly distributed throughout. So there's no way, period, that you can change your lower abs. There's just no way to do it. Not to mention the fact that leg raises don't even involve the rectus abdominis, not dynamic. So, I mean, look, it is a nonsense idea to do leg raises once you understand the biomechanics of it. And you tell somebody this, and some people, I had one person say, you know what, everything you say makes sense. I just can't let go of it. I can't let go of it. And this describes human beings. People embrace, they attach themselves to an idea, and they can't let go of it. Even if you explain the mechanics and the science and the logic, and even though they understand it, they couldn't refute it. People are creatures of habit.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, like how you mentioned, like a lot of people would do the preacher curl, right? Like trying to shape the biceps.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but then you can't change anything about that.
You cannot change the shape of a muscle.
Mm.
I mean, again, for the same reason, because of the all or nothing principle of muscle contraction. A muscle will always, 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 always have even tension throughout. It'll never have more tension on one end than the other end. Now, someone says, well, what about preacher curls? I say, well, that's different. Now what you're getting is more tension in the early part of the range of motion, but the tension through the muscle is still the same, right? When you do a standing barbell curl, your forearm is hanging vertically, which is the neutral position, right? So you're getting no tension in the very beginning of a standing barbell curl. When you're doing a preacher barbell curl, that forearm is now at an angle, so it is not neutral. That means you're getting tension at the very beginning of the movement, but that doesn't change anything having to do with how much tension is distributed through the length of the bicep.
Yeah, it's also like, I mean, in the sense, just to pick up where you are, like dumbbell lateral raises, like the bottom range is the easiest. You can like, I can give you like 30 kg. You can just have the dumbbells by the sides. And keep doing.
I mean, you know, in my book, I explain this thing that I call the resistance. It's called the resistance curve, but I didn't name it. But you may remember that I drew a circle.
Mm.
So imagine you've got a circle here, and in the middle of the circle, you've got, let's say, a pendulum of some sort. Okay, you've got your circle, and you've got this pendulum that's hanging there, right? So if that pendulum is hanging vertically, and I walk away, that pendulum will stay right there because it's in the neutral position. If I move it like this and back away, it'll go back to the neutral position, right? If I swing it around to the top of the circle, right, I can almost balance it there, right? So support beams and buildings are vertical for this reason, right? You can put all the weight you want to on top of that support beam and it'll hold it. But as soon as you do this, it'll crush it, right? So parallel to gravity is always neutral. Neutral meaning whatever muscle is holding the limb in that position doesn't have to work. If I put my arm on a tabletop and it's vertical, right, I can put any weight I want on here. I don't care how heavy it is. I can put a weight in here that's much heavier than I can actually curl. But as long as my forearm is vertical, I can balance it right there. As soon as I go like this, it starts to load the bicep. But when it's like this, nothing's loaded. As soon as I go like this, it starts to load the tricep. But here, in this vertical position, nothing's loaded. So if you take this pendulum and you move it at a 45-degree angle, it'll want to return to the base with a certain amount of resistance, a certain amount of force, right? And that amount of force depends on how much weight is on the end of the lever, how long the lever is, and the angle at which this lever is to gravity. Let's just say for the moment that it's 50 pounds, because this is actually the 50% position, right? So if I move it up horizontally, it'll want to come down with 100 pounds of force, 100% of whatever it has available to it, right? If I keep it moving it up, it'll go 50%, then 100, then 50%, then 100%, then 50%. So this is the way our body works too, right? When you're doing with freeway gravity, whatever limb is vertical is neutral. Okay, so one way we can understand this is, let's just say you hear someone say, you know, when you're doing rowing exercises, you're working your biceps, right? And I even heard one guy say, you don't ever have to do curls because when you do rowing, you're using more weight than you would on curls. And so you're actually working your biceps harder than you would. No, because the whole time you're rowing, the forearm is hanging vertically. And so the forearm is neutral, and the muscles that control the forearm are the bicep and the tricep, right? The upper arm is going, let me get a little thing here. Okay, so imagine that this is your arm, right? If this is your forearm, and this is your upper arm bone, and you're doing a one-arm row, and you're going to go like this, right? This is the bone. This is the upper arm bone. This is the one that's encountering a perpendicular position with gravity. So the muscles that are operating this bone are the muscles that are loaded. You might think it's the back, you might think it's the shoulders, whatever's up here is making this bone go up. But this is just hanging. This is just hanging from your elbow. The biceps aren't participating. In fact, I have another one that'll show you even better. Okay, so here's one I made that shows you the bicep. Actually, it goes like this. So if this is the forearm, this is where the bicep connects. This is the bicep right here. So when the bicep contracts, it bends the elbow. But imagine this is the bicep, and now I'm rowing. All right? This bicep isn't having to do anything. It's completely relaxed. All right? The elbow, the forearm is just hanging from the elbow. It's just going along for the ride. So the idea that you're working your bicep when you're rowing is false. It's just plain old mechanically engineering false, right? So in my book, I explain an active lever and a neutral lever. So when you're doing the rowing, the upper arm bone is the active lever because that's the one that's getting horizontal, perpendicular gravity. This is the neutral lever. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at an exercise, we're saying, is the right lever active? Is the right lever neutral? Right? And sometimes we realize, it's just amazing to me that we have, as an industry, have lost our way so badly that we don't even understand basic physics. Just basic physics. Here's a basic physics thing. When you're doing dumbbell side bends, presumably you're going to hold the dumbbell in one hand, nothing in the other, and you're going to go to the right because the weight is pulling you to the left. So why would you hold the dumbbell in each hand? I'm not saying you do, but some people do. They put a weight in each hand, and they're just counterbalancing. The whole idea is to create imbalance, to want this weight to pull you to the left so that the muscle has to pull you to the right. But now you've added a weight to this side, so now the weight is pulling the other weight. Right? That would be you like you doing tricep push downs, right? With, let's just say, 40 pounds. And at the same time, you put 20-pound wrist weights on your wrists. You're counterbalanced. These are things that should be very logical to people, and yet no one thinks about these things. Or I mean, said no one, but I mean, the vast majority of the industry has been led by dogma. Right? Now you can look at a guy like, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Lee Haney, anyone you want to look at, and you can say, well, how did they get to look so good? It's like, well, if you do enough things right and you have good genetics and you take a lot of supplements, you're going to build muscle. As I said earlier, the exercises that don't contribute much will not take away the benefit you got from another exercise that was good. At the end of the day, they might look good. So the idea that you would say the fact that they look good is evidence that everything they did was also good would be like me saying, okay, so if I arrive at a destination over there and you're waiting for me at that destination, and then you say to me, oh, you arrived. I go, yes. That's proof that the road you took wasn't bumpy, wasn't rocky, wasn't muddy, wasn't wet, wasn't hilly, that it was a good, efficient, clean road. No. The fact is, I came up a road that was really dirty and bumpy and rocky and wet, and my tires were spinning and my car was going like this. But I could have taken a smooth road over there. I would have arrived the same way, but I would have arrived with less wear and tear on my vehicle and with less wasted effort and maybe with less injuries.
Yeah, totally understand you. Yeah. So I'm gonna have two questions that I've mentioned about before coming from someone. So with regards to how Coach Kasem from N1,
okay,
and his take on what was it, the Lat Pull Down.
Okay.
That it's working away from the mechanics of the rib cage. This is a 2D thought process that doesn't account for actual lab mechanics and it's debunked in the labs as well? That's the whole question.
Yeah, I read that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, what was he saying was better? Do you remember what he was saying was better?
Not sure. I didn't read through. The guy sent me the question to ask, so.
Yeah, I remember seeing something about the muscle wraps around the rib cage, and so look, again, when we analyze an exercise, all we have to do is just ask ourselves a few simple questions. Is the limb that's being moved by that muscle moving toward the origins of that muscle? Okay, this is the reason why a one-arm dumbbell row isn't the best lat exercise, because you're not moving toward the spine, right? You're moving back, right? So that the assumption then is that the muscle origin is over there somewhere. The muscle origin is on my spine, right? That means I got to pull in toward my spine, toward the lower 2/3 of my spine and the very top of the posterior part of my pelvis. That's where the origins of the lats are. So the movement has to be down and in, right? So that would suggest something like a pull down. It might even suggest something like a chin up. But in fact, the best lat exercise is a thing that's called a pull in, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. But let's just look for a moment at what might be wrong with a chin up, okay? The first thing I would say is that if you understand how the shoulder joint is designed, right? You have a ball and socket, right? And then this is the upper arm bone, and it goes up, and then it hits this little bony thing right here that's called the acromion process. This is attached to your scapula, your shoulder blade, right? So when you lift your arm higher than that, you basically push up the scapula. You cause it to rotate up, but it's rotating up because you're pushing on it. And when you're pushing on it, you're actually squeezing what's in between the acromion process and the humerus, and that's called the supraspinatus tendon. It's the tendon of a little muscle that goes across the top of your shoulder. And you're also squeezing this thing called the bursa sac, the subacromial bursa. And it's never good to squeeze the supraspinatus tendon. The bursa is kind of designed to cushion that. So if you're going to put a box on a shelf, or maybe not, I mean, the heavier the object that you're putting on a shelf, the more strain there is on that bursa and supraspinatus tendon. But the shoulder joint was generally not designed to have your arms going overhead over and over and over again. It's actually more strenuous on the shoulder joint to push upward than it is to pull downward, right? Because if we evolved from primates, we were used to hanging, right? But what happens is, so you have a little bit of a what they call of an impingement issue, or impingement syndrome, the squeezing of those two things when you raise your arms up. But that's not the bigger problem. There are a couple bigger problems. There's a thing that's called mechanical disadvantage. And that happens when the muscle has to pull on the bone that it's attached to from an angle that's mostly parallel. Okay, so going back to this thing. So right now you can see this muscle is almost the same angle as the forearm. Okay, so this is mechanical disadvantage, right? So if I try and pull on this rope here, it's going to require a lot more tension now than it does here. Than it does here. And the reason is because now I'm starting with a neutral lever at mechanical disadvantage. Here I'm starting with a fully active lever at mechanical disadvantage. Okay, so what you want to be careful of when you're doing a chin-up is that when you're going like this, your lat muscle comes up and ties into your humerus right around there, parallel to this bone. I want this bone to go out. But my lat can't pull it out. It can only pull down. It's going like this. That means I need to produce about 8 or 9 times more force in order to get that bone to go that way, because most of my effort is coming this way, right? That means like only 10% of my effort is being used that way. 90% of it is being wasted inward. And it's also really, really risky. So the best place to start a pull down is with an arm at about a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the movement should start. It shouldn't start so high. It should start right about there. Then you come in. Now, you'll notice that when you do chin-ups and when you do pull-downs, you cannot bring your arms all the way into the side of your body.
Mm.
You just can't do it. And the reason you can't do it has nothing to do with strength. The reason you can't do it is because if you're using 2 arms at a time, let me see if I can stand back here a little bit. If you're doing 2 arms at a time, right? For me to pull inward with both arms, you see how close my hands are now?
Mm.
My hands weren't that close to begin with,
Mm.
right? And if you're holding on to a bar, right, they're not going to slide on the bar. They're going to stay that same width at the bottom that they were at the top. And that's going to prevent you from bringing your upper arms all the way in, which is going to prevent full contraction of the lats. You want full contraction of the lats, the same reason you want full contraction of the bicep by fully bending the elbow, right? You want to fully shorten the muscle that you're working. When you do a cable, if you grab a cable from over there and you pull it all the way in, you can bring your upper arm bone all the way to the side of your rib cage, and you can get to a full latissimus contraction. And when you come up, you'll be sparing yourself that mechanical disadvantage of having the arm go up too high. So that is the better exercise. One pulley from the side, you're going to pull in. That is better than a pull down, and it's better than a pull up. Better contraction, safer on the joint. Now, the one thing I will tell you here is that, you know, the way our shoulder joint is designed, the way it's designed is like if I put my arm right here, right, and I rotate out, you'll notice that I can't rotate my arm all the way out so that it's completely pointing to the side, right? So that means that when you bring your arm in, if that resistance is coming from too much to the side, it's going to be torquing your arm outward into an unnatural, excessively externally rotated position. Okay, so when you're in the up position, it's okay to make your torso look that way with the pulley over there. But as you pull in, you want to rotate your torso toward it so that you don't have to externally rotate that arm so much. Boom, 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 boom. And this is a natural movement. This is the way our shoulder joint naturally works and our lats naturally work, which means, by the way, that you cannot do both sides at the same time, because you cannot rotate to both sides at the same time. Okay, so do one arm at a time, right arm, left arm. You can go back and forth if you want, but that is, and you can go as heavy as you want. I mean, it's not, because it's a pulley exercise, don't think that it's any lighter than it would be if you were doing a cable pull down or a chin up. I mean, I can use a heavy enough weight that limits me to 6 reps. That's heavy, right? And when we say heavy, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a weight that challenges you to complete 6 reps.
Okay. Then the second question is that from the same person, says that your recommendation of a mid-trap exercise is not very ideal on a biomechanical standpoint.
Well, I'll tell you right now, he's completely wrong from a biomechanical standpoint. Biomechanically speaking, that is the only thing that the middle trapezius does. I mean, if you were a middle trapezius fiber and you were standing on this man's spine, holding a muscle fiber, and the other end of it goes to the scapula, and you pull on that muscle fiber, what happens? The shoulders go back, right? If you relax it, the shoulders go forward. Right? That is biomechanically the only thing that muscle can do. It can't do anything else, right? So now, if the question is, it's difficult to do if you don't have 2 pulleys, okay, that's a legitimate question, because the best way to do this is with 2 pulleys that are about a meter and a half apart, right? You got to have resistance coming from that side, resistance coming from that side. And then you pull the shoulders back. Yes, you can involve the arms a little bit, but the emphasis should not be on the arms. The emphasis should be on the scapula, because that is the only thing the middle trapezius controls. It does not control the arms. It does not connect to the arms. It cannot pull on the arms.
Good. So one question that just came in is, how would you train a pec minor?
Okay, let me address that in just a second. Let me just say that maybe I failed to answer the question. What do you do if you don't have two sets of pulleys? The one thing I would say is, I use a free motion machine, and a free motion machine allows adjustment up and down, in and out. They're expensive machines, right? But a cheap way of doing this, if you can afford this, is just get two single pulleys. They cost $100, $150. You buy two, your investment is $300. I'm talking about the kind that doesn't have the weight stack that comes on it. It has pegs. So you can put the weight on you want on the pegs. You put one over there. Sometimes they're wall mounted, sometimes they're floor mounted. Put one over there, put one over there. Now you've got a cheaper way of doing your scapular retraction. The other way of doing it is you can connect a couple of elastic bands to a wall, one over there, and use the elastic bands, although elastic bands are more compromised because as they stretch, they increase their tension, and as they relax, they reduce their tension. Well, that's the opposite of what our muscles do. When our muscles elongate, they get stronger. When they shorten, they get weaker, right? So you can still do it, although it's not going to feel quite as good and it won't be quite as productive. And it's also hard to get elastic bands that offer enough tension. And usually when I do it, I do, bracketing, which is I start with a lightweight, then I do 8 to 10 sets, and I increase on every set. Well, you're not going to get 10 different tensions of elastic bands, right? So that gets a little difficult. If you don't have that, if you don't have elastic bands or any way to attach them, you could do some kind of chest supported rowing exercise where if you can get like a stool that you can put your chest against, you could just do a back shrug. Yes, you can involve the arms a little bit. And by the way, if you're doing a shrugging on a machine, let's just say you're at the gym and you've got a machine. A lot of people do the rowing like this. In other words, they don't even move the shoulders. They don't do this, right? So I want to emphasize to you that the pulling back of the shoulders is more important than the arms when you're doing middle trapezius, upper, inner, back. Okay. The person who just asked the question, I want you to look up the anatomy of the pectoralis minor. And what you'll notice is the pectoralis minor does not even connect to the arms. The pectoralis minor holds your scapula in place. The pectoralis minor does not add any growth to your pecs. That's why in my book, I talk about the pectoralis minor and I show pictures of it and I say, I'm including it here only because people ask the question. The pectoralis minor does not do the same anatomical function that does the pectoralis major. They share the same first word, pectoralis, but they do not do anything similar in terms of anatomical function. And you cannot directly work the pectoralis minor, and it cannot grow to any great degree. Please do look it up, pectoralis minor anatomy. Images, you'll see it. You'll say, oh, well, if it starts here and it ends there, there's just no way that it's going to do the same function as the pecs, nor is it even that much of a voluntary muscle.
Good. So, with regards to since bodybuilding training, right? Since you've been in bodybuilding scene for quite a while, have you seen that the bodybuilding or has it changed a lot in these years from the time you started too?
You mean the physiques?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty shocking, I would say, what's happened to bodybuilding. It's kind of a shame. I mean, it used to be so beautiful, right? I mean, we remember the bodybuilders, Frank Zane, Bob Paris, Francis Benfato, Mohammed Makawi, Lila Brada, Sean Ray, we go on and on. Magnificent, beautiful, artistic physiques, small waists, and now, they're boxy and they have these big waists. So the question probably should not be, why are bodybuilders' shapes developing differently than they did before? What I would say is, for example, we just saw Big Ramey win the Olympia, right? And even though it might appear that something he did or didn't do caused his body to develop that way instead of that way. In fact, his body developed the only way his body could, because genetics is genetics, right? The difference is that once upon a time, steroids were not so prolific. They were a small part of the industry. In the early days, steroids were mostly used in a way that allowed a bodybuilder to keep his muscle, to not lose his muscle while he was dieting. And let me explain that a little bit further. When we diet, when we start eating fewer and fewer and fewer calories, the body doesn't know what you want. It doesn't know you're trying to win a bodybuilding contest. It doesn't know how you look. It doesn't care how you look. It senses that there's a crisis, right? It senses starvation. So the body wants to preserve your life. So what the body does, it figures out two ways that it can cause you to burn fewer calories. One is it'll reduce your thyroid production so that your metabolism slows down. And the other is it reduces your testosterone production so that you lose muscle, because muscle is the motor, right? So if your car was as smart as your body, your car, let's say with a V8 motor, as it starts to run out of gas, would suddenly become a 6-cylinder and a 4-cylinder, right? Because it knows that it can go farther on 4 cylinders than it can on 8. So that's what was happening before steroids started into the 80s, 70s, 80s, but mostly 80s. Bodybuilders before that were losing too much muscle because and not getting as lean because their metabolism was slowing down and they were losing muscle. So in the early years, the people who won the bodybuilding contest won them because they had the combination of size and definition and aesthetics. Later, steroid use, I assume, has gotten much, much, much more prolific. So that now it's just a game of size. The bigger, the better. But I don't think it's better. Here's the problem that's always existed is that, Lila Brada had a magnificent physique. Lila Brada was relatively short. I think he's only like 5'6", right? Maybe he's 5'8", I don't know. Relatively short. So, but he had plenty of mass. In fact, his slogan was mass with class. But if he stood next to Lee Haney, he would be dwarfed. And if you're a judge and you're sitting in front of Lila Brada and Lee Haney, it's pretty hard to say no to Lee Haney because he's just overwhelmingly big. So that's kind of how it started. It's almost like if you run a foot race, you know who crosses the finish line first. There's no debate. But in bodybuilding, there's no such thing as anyone crossing the finish line first. It's subjective. All right. So you go, well, who's more impressive? You don't say who's more aesthetic. You say who's more impressive. And so you end up, so little by little, it became a contest of size rather than a contest of aesthetics. So now, most of the bodybuilders that have, my type of frame, Frank Zane type of frame, ectomorphic, we cannot compete with those size monsters because we can never carry that amount of mass. They have the genetics that predisposes them to be bigger, and they supplement. So it becomes a contest of bigness. It's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know if it'll ever change, but it's the same problem that, sort of ruined women's bodybuilding was that once upon a time, I don't know if you remember the name Beth Francis, but Beth Francis lost to Rachel McLish. Rachel McLish, was the leading female bodybuilder at the time because, well, most people would say she was muscular and beautiful. Beth Francis came along and she had more of a much stockier, thicker, more muscle, less feminine appearance. And so they gave the trophy to Rachel McLish, and there was outrage because there was no denying that Beth Francis had more muscle. So they ran into that fork of the road sooner, right? It's like, well, what do we do? If we give it to this person, we'll get people criticizing us that we're not giving it to a woman. We're giving it to a man wearing a bikini. It's a difficult thing. I mean, You know, and when we're talking about aesthetics, there's a billion opinions, different opinions about what constitutes more aesthetic.
Yeah, yeah. Just like now, like for females, right, you know, there's like bikini, there's physique, there's figure, like all these different classes.
Yeah, and you know, I train some women, and they say, what division should I compete in? And I go, look, my advice to you is be the best you can be, right? And then enter the division that's appropriate for what you got, and then take the trophy they give you. But unfortunately, that doesn't make everybody happy, because what'll end up happening is you get a woman who's muscular enough to be in figure, but she competes in bikini because there's less muscle in bikini. And if this girl here has enough femininity, she has a pretty face, if she has nice hair, she has a small waist, she can pretend, she can sort of fool the judges into thinking, look, I'm a bikini girl with a lot of muscle, right? Sometimes it works. I mean, look, I've sat at the judges' table where I have given the first place award in my vote to the girl that had less muscle. I turn my vote into the head judge, and everybody else does too. And what do they announce? The more muscular girl. That's not who I voted for, but I'm not the only judge, right? So that's what happens, is that there's differences of opinion. Yeah. And apparently, if the girl is pretty enough, they'll give it to her for bikini, even though she's too muscular.
Yeah. So, as I'm not sure when this connect, because normally Instagram lives are an hour, so I assume it's close to an hour. One question that came up is, how often do you go to failure on your 8 to 10?
Do I go to what?
Failure.
Oh, never.
Okay.
Never. Let me address that real quickly for you. You know, through the years, there's been a couple of beliefs that you would think make sense, right? And you would think they make sense on the basis of making the muscle grow. One of them is training to failure. One of them is forced reps. One of them is short rests between sets, right? Because all of these things translate to intensity, right? And you naturally assume that the more intense, the better, right? The fact is that all of these things, failure, supersetting, you know, 2 exercises for the same muscle, short rests, forced reps, breakdown sets, all of these things operate on the belief that the more fatigue the muscle experiences, the more it grows. Fatigue is one of the factors that makes the muscle grow, but it is not the most important factor. It's not the primary factor. The primary factor is something called recruitment. That means the percentage of muscle fibers that are participating. High recruitment means lots of participation. Low recruitment means not very much participation. So if you take up, let's just say you're going to do flat dumbbell presses, and you take a light weight that you theoretically could do, let's say 50 reps with, and you do 10, you're going to get a very, very small percentage of muscle recruitment. Now, if you keep going, when you get to 42, 45, 47 reps, and it's assuming the weight creates failure at 50 reps, now you're getting lots of recruitment, right? And so now you're getting muscle growth, but it took, you know, the first 40 reps of low recruitment for this thing to finally switch over into high recruitment. So you may have heard that there was a study that was done that showed that you can grow equally well with high reps and low weight, or heavy weight and low reps. That's only partially true. If I do one set over there, or if this guy does one set over there, high reps, 50 reps, with a weight that really knocks him out, failure at 50, and you measure his muscle growth, and then you take this guy over here and you give him a weight that he can do 6 reps with, and he does it till he can't do a 7th, right? And you measure his growth, you say, same amount of muscle growth. Here's the difference. Volume plays a huge role in muscle growth. So if you want more sets, the guy who did a set of 50 won't be able to do much more. Maybe 1 set, maybe 2 more sets. He's got so much lactic acid in his muscle, he's spent. This guy here, 6 reps, he could do another 8 or 10 sets of 6. He's going to get more growth. And by the way, there's for those of you that want to look this up, there's a guy named Chris Beardsley, who's an exercise physiologist. He's written some very good articles about training to failure. And what he says is when you have a weight that basically challenges your muscle to about 85% of its maximum capacity, you get high participation, high recruitment on the very first rep. Same on the second. Same on the third. So the idea that only the last few reps of a 6-rep set produce growth is wrong, right? You're going to get as much growth as you can get on, or stimulation as you can get on that very first rep. That's another advantage of going heavy, low reps to not failure. So if you can get 6 reps with a set and you stop at 5, fine. Because if you go to failure, you're going to get more fatigue and you're going to compromise any future sets. You're better off doing more sets at a 95% effort than you are doing fewer sets at 100% effort. That's why failure isn't so good.
Yeah. One more question is your take on like the visceral fat loss creams, like waist creams, things like that.
Look, that gets into what would be considered biochemistry. Okay, and I'm not a biochemist, right? In fact, I'm not even an exercise physiologist. I am a biomechanic specialist. But I can tell you that it doesn't make much sense to me, just based on what I know. The idea that you're going to make fat go away because of something topical is bizarre to me. I mean, could it happen? I suppose it could. My understanding of visceral fat or any kind of subcutaneous fat is that it must be spent. It must be spent internally like a combustion engine, right? And it needs to be spent as a fuel. The idea that you're going to rub something on your skin begs all kinds of questions like, how does it get through the skin? Once it gets to the fat, what does it do? Dissolve it? Does it convert it to a free fatty acid? Does it get urined out? Does it get used up as fuel? It's a bizarre. I can't answer that question as a complete negative, but it doesn't sound logical to me.
Okay. Then the last question is, do you have a recommended optimal tempo? Like one of the guy was saying that he does 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down for 12 reps. Do you have a recommended?
12 seconds.
Yeah. 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down for 12 reps.
Oh, for 12 reps. Well, the number of reps is a different issue. The pace matters. And you know what they know. If again, Chris Beardsley has written about this. What they know is that if you're using a weight that causes you to lift the weight slower than you would be able to if it was lighter, you're already in the category of muscle growth. In other words, slow concentric muscle contraction is part of the formula for muscle growth. When you're doing the eccentric part of the repetition, it should always be slower than the concentric. So if you're doing 3 sets up, 3 seconds up, you should probably do something like 5 or 6 seconds down. You're releasing tension. You're not causing tension, right? So you're going to get growth on the eccentric part of the rep. But you have to take advantage of it by letting it go much more slowly than the positive. The number of reps, you know, you can do 3 seconds up, 6 seconds down, whether you're doing 6 reps or whether you're doing 20 reps. That's a different issue altogether.
All right. So I guess it's already been an hour or hour plus. Like, for people, where can they find you, and will you be coming out with any more content or books, things like that?
Well, they can contact me at DB Fitness. DB is my initial. dbfitness@aol.com. And you can visit my website, dougbrignole.com. And you can find me there. If you can buy the book on Amazon, you can buy the book from me, you can buy the book from the publisher, healthylearning.com. If you want the ebook, you have to get it from the publisher, healthylearning.com. And right now I'm working with a professor of exercise science. We're going to be co-authoring a university biomechanics book. because he said to me, look, there isn't a good biomechanics book that I like. He wanted to use my book, and I said, well, the problem with my book is that it's very focused on resistance exercise. If you're a student of biomechanics, you're going to want to learn biomechanics for everything from training a pole vaulter to, you know, reducing injury risk in the workplace, right? So it needs to be more broad, and I will be happy to do that with you. And so that's the book I'm working on now. Books take a long time. My last book took 7 years to write. So this book maybe take 2 years to get it out there. It'll be a biomechanics university book. But I am associated with Smart Training 365. And Smart Training 365 is my associate, Mo Larby, and he puts out a lot of video content. So we meet weekly and we do videos right here in my living room. I put out a studio and a backdrop. And so we create videos that explain not only how to train, but how to diet and how to work on your tan and how to work on your posing, how to enter a bodybuilding contest, and, you know, how to train if you're a coach, how to train a senior citizen versus how to train a kid, you know, all this stuff. So Smart Training 365 is another way you can find me.
Done. Sure. No, I mean, there were some more questions, but I said that was the last question. So very grateful and thank you for coming in and giving me an hour of your time.
Listen, I would love to answer more questions, but they really are endless.
Yeah.
They are endless. I mean, you know, I get so many emails, questions that you know, and the problem I have is when I answer one, people think, oh, good, he answers questions, and they send 2 and 3 and 4 more, and it's like, I just can't spend that much time, and it takes a long time to type it versus to speak it. But anyway, I hope that eventually my book and my videos will answer everybody's questions.
Very thankful for your time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thanks for everybody for coming, and speak to you soon. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Doug. Have a great day.